Greetings, students. Welcome to Chapter 4, Hebrew Chapter 4, Nouns and Verbs. This is Chapter 4 that begins on page 25. As I've said in previous lectures, the sequence of learning that I recommend for all of you is that you actually read through the new material in Chapter 4 first. Don't necessarily need to do the exercises for that first round, but read through the new material first, watch the lecture, and then go back and reread the chapter, going carefully through all the exercises, even those especially those exercises that aren't assigned as homework, because they are all very, very helpful. This is a really good book when it comes to exercises, so I highly encourage you to do that. What's more, this lecture, if you are still struggling with recognizing the consonants of the Aleph Beit or the vowels, then you're in a little bit of trouble. This should be second nature to you at this point. But if it's not, if you are still struggling with that, then I highly encourage you to prioritize working on recognizing those consonants and vowels. Very, very important. And in general, the students that succeed in this class are those who prioritize learning that material early on. So do make sure that you are able to recognize and read the consonants and the vowels. That will really help you out. So let's move on with Chapter 4. Here are your objectives. Students will be able to recognize nouns and verbs. And then students will be able to read sentences that use nouns and third masculine singular perfect verbs. I will explain a little bit more what we mean by third masculine singular perfect verbs, but for now, we'll just leave it as it is and move on to recognizing nouns and verbs. Okay, so in this chapter, we are already entering into the reading of sentences. So we will actually be reading Hebrew sentences in this chapter. It's amazing. We're only in the 4th chapter and already you are at this level where you will be reading Hebrew sentences. So all of this is really, really good. Now for in Hebrew, the basic elements of a sentence are you need to have a subject, neither a noun or a pronoun, and then a verb. The subject is basically the actor, the actor associated with the verbal action, and the verb, of course, being the word that describes the action being taken. And so the noun can be a person, place, thing, idea, even or a pronoun. That is he, she, or it. So it can be any one of these things, and then the verb is the verb that describes the action. So these are just the basic elements of most Hebrew sentences. Okay, now Hebrew verbs that we are going to work with in this book generally are going to be either in the perfect or the imperfect. Okay, so when we talk about the perfect, I put tense in quotation marks here because really we're talking about a particular verbal aspect that generally refers to completed action. So in most cases, a perfect tense verb will be described in the past tense. So I'll give you some examples of that. We will be working with the perfect for quite a while, and once we get to the imperfect, it will be quite clear. And at that point, you will be very, very experienced with the perfect. This is also sometimes called the suffix conjugation, and the reason people call it that is because the markers attached to the verb that tell you whether it is first person, that is I, second person, that is you, or third person, he, she, and it, go at the end of the verb, that is, they are suffixes. So we'll come across that in short order, but I'm just trying to give you a tip, give you a little bit of a look into the future. The imperfect quote-unquote tense, or the prefix conjugation, typically describes incomplete action. So in most cases, the imperfect verb will describe future action or simply action that is not yet completed. We're not learning the imperfect in this chapter. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of a 30,000-foot view of Hebrew verbs. But today's focus, as you can tell from the slide, is on the perfect quote-unquote tense. That is that aspect of the Hebrew verbal system that describes completed action. Okay? that's what we'll be working with today and in most of our upcoming chapters until we hit the imperfect. Okay, let's look at a word order in Hebrew sentences. We'll start actually with English. Here you have an example sentence, David ate, right? Maybe say David ate pizza or something like that, but David ate, David slept, something like that. In English, typically the subject precedes the verb, right? We can find some exceptions here and there, but in general, subjects precede verbs in English. I ate, I read, something like that. She ate, she read, something like that. The subject, as I said, generally precedes the verb. In Hebrew, the verb generally precedes the subject, and sometimes the subject precedes the verb. And there are a couple of other variations in there, but in general, you will find the verb preceding the subject, and occasionally the subject preceding the verb. So just keep in mind that in Hebrew, you may find some variations that are a little bit foreign to the English. To the English reader or the English speaker. You may find that the subject doesn't seem to be in the quote-unquote right place or in the place to which you are accustomed. Just keep that in mind as you're beginning to wade into the world of Hebrew verbs. Sorry for that, just needed to get a quick drink of water. But as I said, there's a slightly different verbal order for most Hebrew sentences. Just keep that in mind. It will look a little bit different. It's going to feel a little bit different, but that's just really typical for foreign languages. For those of you who have learned foreign languages, you'll know that it's very easy to kind of transpose grammatical structures or syntactical structures from our native tongue into the new language that you're learning. Or sometimes if you're speaking with an English speaker who speaks English as a second language, sometimes you'll notice that they might put words into an awkward place in the sentence, and that's often because they are reflecting syntactical structure from their own language. So that's a really common kind of phenomenon, and just expect that it might feel a little bit strange as you wade into Hebrew sentences. So here we're actually going to work on some sentences. Now, excuse me, I'm just getting the book out here. This is the first week, chapter 4, the first chapter in which you have a vocab list. It's on page 26. I would encourage you to look at it really quickly. On page 26, you'll see a list of vocab words, and there you will find both verbs and other words. So the verbs are all on the left hand. Well, let's see. Are they all in the left-hand column? Yes. All of the verbs are on the left-hand column. So for instance, in the top left-hand corner, you have the verb zachar. Again, I'm on page 26. Remembered, malach, ruled or reigned. And then skip down a couple words. Amad, stood, shama, heard or listened, and shamar, guard or kept. These are all what we would call third masculine singular perfect verbs. Now, when we say third, it means we're talking about the third person, that is he, she, or it. And in this case, they're all he or it. And so we'll learn, of course, later how to say she as well, along with the second and first persons. But for now, they start by introducing us to the simplest form. And the third masculine singular form of the verb is, in fact, the simplest form of the verb to learn. So it's nice that they introduce it to us that way. So let's begin by doing a little bit of reading. David malach. David malach. So I'm reading it kind of slow, right? Because I know we're still at the beginning of the semester. We're still learning how to read. And so it'll take us a little bit of time before we'll be able to look at the sentence and by second nature, say David malach, right? You'll get there. But just give yourself some time. So remember in Hebrew that we read up, down, up, down, up, down in general. So we begin with the consonant David malach. Now, what does this mean? David is the word for David, right? That's kind of an easier one to remember. So here we have a personal noun. The the word David. And then what did David do? He malach. That means he ruled. David ruled. Okay, so just from the vocab list, you can already piece together entire sentences. So that's really great. This is a complete Hebrew sentence. David malach. Let's look at the next one. Amad na'ar. Amad na'ar. Now, something you'll notice here, when I read Hebrew, in general, you put the accent on the very last syllable. So in this word I was reading here, amad, how would you divide the syllables? Here, and so you have a and then mad. In general, in Hebrew, the accent goes on the final syllable. So amad as opposed to amad. Or think of David as opposed to David, and then malach as opposed to malach. Now, there are some exceptions to this. There often are exceptions in language. And oftentimes when there is an exception, our book will place a little caret right over the top. You'll notice this on page 26. If you turn to 26 and you look at the word na'ar, there is a less than sign, a little caret right above the noon, and that is a way of indicating that a particular word has an alternative pronunciation with the accent being placed at a different point. So you'll notice that the caret on page 26 is hanging over the noon, and that's because this is not pronounced na'ar, it's pronounced na'ar. So that caret is just there to help remind you of that or to teach you about that. So this is amad na'ar, a young man stood. Or you could even put it in really wooden terms. He stood, a young man, and then smooth it out and say a young man stood. Now, this is a long sentence, right? It looks a little bit intimidating. Let's read it first. Who, right? Who begins with a hey. We have a vav here with a dot in the middle, a dot going through the vav, which tells you that it is the sound oo as opposed to w or v. The aleph is silent because it comes at the end of the word. So hu sha mar bayit. Hu sha mar bayit. He guarded a house. He, who is he? Who is the pronoun for he or it? Who he guarded shamar bayit, a house. He guarded a house. Now we have na'ar. Remember this in the vocab list. This one has the little caret indicating that the accent is over the noon. Na'ar shama. Na'ar shama. And this is means a young man heard. A young man heard or listened, right? A young man heard or listened. So those are, in fact, the very first Hebrew sentences that you've ever read, right? Unless you've taken Hebrew in a different course. And these are very, very basic. These are sort of C-spot run. In fact, these are easier than C-spot run because a C-spot run involves imperatives. And so we're not working with imperatives. And so these are even easier than C-spot run. But that's okay. That's where we're at right now. So here is just a little bit of a wrap up. We've just covered these nouns and verbs. I highly encourage you to go through every single exercise in chapter 4. Use the answer key. You absolutely need the answer key in this class, and I'll tell you why. In a distributed language class, that is an online language class, the TA and I cannot be there while you're going through your exercises to provide you with immediate feedback. Immediate feedback is really important for learning languages. You need to know right away whether you made a mistake or not. And so you need to get the answer key. It's a required part of the course. It is listed under required textbook. It's only $9. Get it. It is worth it so that you can go through all of these exercises and check to see if you get the answers right. And if you don't get the answers right, then you go back and review why. If you still can't figure out why, then what you need to do is either send me an email or email the TA Or if it's very urgent, you can send me a text at 253-227-2878. That's no problem at all. For these online classes, I give out my text number because I know how important it is in language learning context for you to get immediate feedback, or at least to get your answers answered as quickly as possible. So if you're in a situation where you need to get in touch with me as quickly as possible, where you really need to get an answer to something, I would say text me and you will get a response from me more quickly. If you email me, you can expect a response within a 24-hour period of time. But if something's very urgent and you really can't figure out what the answer key is telling you, something like that, then feel free to text me. It's not a problem. Probably what will happen is I'll give you a call, right, and we'll sort it out over the phone. Just because sometimes it's hard to describe what you're struggling with in a voicemail or in a text or something like that. But don't hesitate to do that. Don't hesitate to text me, 253-227-2878. So that's chapter 4, sentences. Note, here's our little nota bene. Take note that you have in this chapter your very first vocabulary list. This will be on the quiz. Or I should say, words from this will be on the quiz. You should be prepared for those. You should be able to recognize these on the spot and under time pressure. So begin working on that vocab list. The vocab that we're learning in this book is sort of basic, very, very common Hebrew vocab that, if you know it, will allow you to use the Bible software and different lexica more effectively, because you'll be able to kind of brush past the most common words and only use the lexica for kind of the more difficult words. So it's kind of building a bit of efficiency into your translation and interpretive process. Okay, that's it, everybody. Thanks, everyone, for watching this lecture on Chapter 4, Nouns and Verbs.